Hi everybody, my name is Rob Scott from UC Today, and in this session I'm joined by Unify Square, and we're going to be looking at the latest service management trends and why AI Ops is growing in popularity in enterprise UC environments. So how about we start with a round of introductions. Alan, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Arun Shen. I'm Vice President of our Professional Service Practice globally, Unify Square. Good to meet all of you.
Hi, I'm Arun Raghavan. I'm VP of Product Development at Unify Square.
I'm Dimitri Blondeel. I proudly run Unify Square's Cloud Managed Services group. We support over 1 million end users across many large enterprises. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about this topic that is close to our hearts.
Great, thanks very much. And we should really set the scene, shouldn't we, to start with? So, Arun, would you like to take this one first? In terms of setting the scene. I know you work with Microsoft Teams and Zoom quite a lot. So, in recent years, what trends are you seeing?
Well, we've recently seen a trend. If you look at it, what's happening, and even so, recently has been accelerated the move to cloud, right? So a lot of the unified communications solutions have, or a lot of the enterprises have moved to cloud-hosted UCaaS solutions. And what that has meant in terms of service management tools such as PowerSuite that we build, there's been it means that we've had to adapt. There's been some focus area changes. For example, a lot of tools in this service management space in the UC market, typically sort of cloud would have focused on monitoring performance metrics of servers, of CPUs, of network, things like that. And now with a lot of those sort of pieces moving over to the cloud, whether it's Teams or Zoom, the focus areas of service management tools, vendors such as us, has to change, has to adapt likewise. So for example, we'd want to focus on performance and experience level metrics for the end user. We'd focus on provisioning. We would focus on licensing, the usage of licensing, and especially security. As more of these workloads move to cloud, what's also important is to look at the security aspects of things. So that's been, I think, a sort of trend shift as companies adopt quite rapidly Teams and Zoom. Tooling such as what we provide with PowerSuite has had to adapt. And it also has had to adapt and get smarter and therefore bring in elements of AI and ML to the core of that. And so I'm sure Alan and Dimitri want to add to that as well.
Yes, sure. Obviously, Arun and I, we work in lockstep to make sure that our customers receive the best possible service. And we see similar trends from a service perspective, right? A lot of our big customers who used to have big on-premise deployments have made very sudden moves to the cloud in this COVID crisis. And we see a shift in, caring for machines, which used to be our job, to caring for end users, which is definitely our new job in this new day and age. So we see very similar trends from my perspective, which is more of an end user perspective. And it's definitely been accelerated over the past few months.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I know, Alan, we were talking about this before, but, everyone's gone home to work. And so what kinds of challenges are being faced by, IT leaders right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm actually going to answer somewhat in an opposite way, in the sense that I actually think there's a bit of a sleeping giant, a sleeping bear right now. And let me paint the picture. If you go back 10 years, 12 years, when the original UC transformation happened, we basically took a static phone on a desk with a dedicated line and said, hey, we're going to rip out that cord and now allow you to do communications from anywhere, any device, any network. And that flexibility both presented the opportunity for users, but also the challenge for IT admins. And one of the things I think that has been a bit lost is that the mode we're working in right now is not a mobile worker scenario. It is a home desk-bound person. They are using the same device on the same network connection for meeting after meeting, in some ways mimicking and going back to the old model where things are static. And so one of the things that we're advising customers, and some are listening, some aren't, is that, hey, once the society opens back up, you're going to start dealing with people trying to join Zoom meetings from Starbucks locations and airports and in cars and from their mobile device. And that isn't happening right now. So that's one of the things I would say is there's a bit of that sleeping giant, and we're advising customers be ready to manage that new way of mobile working that we were in pre-COVID. I think the second thing that's going to exacerbate that is the fact that video usage has gone up probably about 3 times because of COVID. Now picture, and generally speaking, most home networks are fairly robust, but now picture people trying to do video calls from corporate networks, corporate Wi-Fi locations, hotel areas that haven't been tested or planned to accommodate this increased video usage. I think that's going to only exacerbate some of the challenges that enterprises are going to see. And from our perspective, my perspective as a consulting leader, the customers who are listening to the advice and planning and looking at Arun's tooling, looking at Dimitri's services for ongoing support, are going to be the ones that are better prepared for when society opens.
That's a really good point. And you mentioned ongoing support there. So Dimitri, what from your perspective, what are the challenges there?
Yeah, so I briefly touched on it before. So what we're seeing is that our customers, they don't care as much about the things they used to care about. So they're not looking at things like how available is my core system, right? They're more looking at things from an end user perspective. So we see a shift, and it's almost a paradigm shift from caring for machines to caring for users. And that's been a big theme for us lately. And from a practical perspective, obviously this massive increase in home working has changed a lot, right? We've been offering what Arun referred to as a experience level agreement for the longest time. So we are, as a managed service provider, guaranteeing certain call qualities on Zoom or Teams or Skype platforms. And obviously, with people working from home, sharing their bandwidth with their kids watching YouTube movies or trying to do some homeschooling, and sharing their bandwidth in many cases with their neighbors as well, has increased the number of core experiences. But then there's one very interesting aspect to that, one that surprised me and surprised many people in the industry, and that is that people are actually happier working from home. Although the quality is not as good as it is when they're in their workplace, people are actually complaining less. So we have a lot of big customers where we measure both user satisfaction and the quality of their meetings and calls. And even if the quality is degrading, the user satisfaction is increasing. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. May have to do with people being happier working from home, may have to do with people having lower expectations when they work from home. So the big challenge in the past few months has actually been what is actually influencing this user sentiment, and trying to figure that out, and then work with Arun's team to actually measure those things that now matter to the users, which are slightly different than they used to be.
If I could follow on to that just a bit, I think one of the next phases we're going to start to see is what I call a hybrid phase, where right now everyone's from home. We're all connected from individual offices. Everyone's kind of on the same plane, and so you have sort of a common set of expectations, whether it be somebody crying in the background or paper rustling, things like that. The next stage is going to be this hybrid environment where offices are not going to suddenly all open up. Everybody shifts back into that kind of working environment. We're going to see shifts. We're going to see subsets of people that go into offices communicating with subset of people that are still remote, right? So now imagine you have a few people sitting in the conference room who are trying to have a business meeting, come to decisions, while half the participants are still in their home, maybe in a quote unquote less professional, less ideal environment. How does that mixture of both, quality of experience, but also user expectation play into that XLA that Dimitri's talking about? And I think that's a really interesting area where we see AI ML having a increased importance is once you start mixing different factors, that's where IT, generally speaking, in a sort of a human effort-driven model, has a hard time wrapping their heads around things that where multiple factors are in play. I know, Arun, do you want to have anything to add on that one?
No, it's what we're seeing, and this is why we're particularly excited, because we have a lot of the data, in the sense that we have been operating a cloud system for a while, right? So we've gotten a lot of the data sort of pre this sort of COVID situation, and we're able to make we think we're in a good position to make these extrapolations, right? Saying, hey, look, this is the typical baseline before that. We're also studying the baseline at the situation, so we've got both those baselines, and this is where we'll talk more about AI ML techniques, but this is why, particularly why I think one of those, a lot of the AI ML techniques is around how do you use all this data to predict. And one big part of AI ML ops is predictive analytics, and that's something we'll, as we proceed, we'll touch on that in further topics.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And with the rise of Microsoft Teams and Zoom during the pandemic, I can only imagine the challenges that we're having, in the data centers at base and at the far end in homes. So it's really interesting, that, Arun. And I'd like to kind of delve more, a little bit deeper into AI ops right now, and why it is becoming so popular in enterprise UC environments. So could you start by kind of just telling us a little bit about AI ops? What is it, and how it helps to solve these challenges?
Sure. So AI ops, it's sort of a new, I guess it's a new label for something that just getting smarter operational tools. But it's more than just a new label. There's been a confluence of factors that have led to this natural evolution, if you will. And essentially, when you think about AI ops, you think about you think about a lot of these voice interactions or video interactions. For example, the one we're having right now, and you look at the data in the last sort of few years or a few months, in fact. And as an example, there are 75 million daily active users on Teams. There are 500 million meeting participants for Teams and Zoom. There's been 500% video growth. There are about 1 billion files being uploaded to Dropbox every day. So the sheer numbers is the amount, the volume of data that's being generated is enormous and just continuing to grow. And if you layer on different security events, like people sharing files, are they the right files? People adding guests to user spaces and things like that. The volume of these transactions, if you will, has increased to such an extent that it is no longer possible for sort of humans to look at an alert, like a traditional sort of service management system, just looking at alerts that were static, that were based on certain thresholds. That's not possible anymore. And so these systems, like the ones that we build and the ones that we manage, have to go to a more adaptive pattern. They have to use intelligence. They have to be able to use all this data to crunch this data both real time, because a lot of times, as you know, in security, especially if you have issues, you got to catch them in real time. And also that goes through communications, voice, etc. And so what we've seen is we've seen a lot of those techniques, AI ML techniques, being used in other fields, being a natural fit for the UC, just because of the sheer volume of data, because of the importance of communication, because of the importance of security in communication, etc. And that has led to that is why it's growing and will continue to grow. There was a study out, Gartner says there's about 8% use right now, and that'll grow 3x or 4x in the next 2-3 years, and that's what we fully expect. That's what we've been gearing up for. Alan, Dimitri.
Yeah, Arun, you made a very good point there related to monitoring versus AI ops, right? So I still have a significant part of my team watching TV screens, watching green lights turn into red, and then reacting to those alerts. That's still a thing today, because there's still equipment out in the field that can fail. But increasingly, what becomes increasingly important is actually becoming preemptive about things, right? Not just proactive. So the classic monitoring is making place for actual trend analysis that is helped by AI ML techniques to actually predict what's going to happen. So I'll give you an example. If a full site goes down in one of the big enterprises that we manage, we'll see that. We'll monitor the site. We'll see a green line turn red, and we'll react to it. We'll jump on it. But while we're jumping on it, there's already 500 people who called the service desk, right? So the value of being proactive through monitoring is somewhat minimal in that case, because the users have noticed it already. If you can see a gradual degradation, a trend in reducing quality, for example, to a specific threshold, you can actually act before the users are impacted. And that's a very, very important thing today. And that is also increasingly what our customers are asking for. So they're still asking for monitoring, like watch those lights, but they're also asking for us to be proactive and preemptive about things, and to discuss trends on a weekly or even in some cases on a daily basis. And AI ML helps us a great deal identifying which topics to focus on.
Great. And Alan, I'm keen to just ask you a question around kind of developing a service management strategy with AI and ML in the mix. So what advice would you give to
Sure.
someone looking at that?
And oftentimes that's actually the position we're in, excuse me, consulting. We tend to actually be engaged first. I think something like 90% of our managed services contracts started with consulting, because usually they have a pain point, they need to do some planning, and then we sort of set the path as the trusted advisor that eventually folds into the operations and management of the service. I think one of the things that we're seeing that's very unique about the transition today, we can't ignore the fact that we're in a much more, I would call, compressed economy. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of budget pressures, and one of the things that we're seeing across the board, even before COVID, but accelerated with COVID, is the shift from IT budgets being spent on people to being spent on SaaS licensing, licensing Office 365 or Zoom or whatever it might be. And so as you see that reduction of headcount and expertise, a lot of enterprises are kind of leaving themselves exposed, because licensing the SaaS service doesn't mean you're getting a managed service. Those are very different things. We recognize that, but a lot of customers don't recognize that. So one of the things we're emphasizing to customers a lot and guiding them on is helping them understand that the way to tackle this in a way that is efficient, proactive, cost-effective, especially given the budget constraints and the lack of headcount, is you have to look at software. You have to look at intelligent automation, like AI ML techniques that Arun's built and that Dimitri's team leverages, in order to get on top of the system that, frankly, you don't even have, probably a service owner dedicated anymore. So that's one of the key elements. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, Arun touched on this, that I want to dive into a bit more, is that we talk about communications a lot, but what we're seeing is that the communications from a temporal standpoint is starting to get stretched into what I call sometimes semi-synchronous communication. So think about COVID and the impact about work schedules. How many families have to deal with kids doing remote learning, and so they take a couple hours off in the afternoon and then they log back on after dinner after the kids are asleep, right? So the old days of being able to assume a 9 to 5 that everybody's a part of are gone. That doesn't change the fact, though, that I'm having a threaded conversation with the finance team around my budget for next year. So, we're having this conversation in a Teams channel. That's still a conversation, but because it's semi-synchronous, that data is now persistent. It's not in a real-time meeting like this, where the data is ephemeral. Anytime you deal with persistent data, you now introduce the risk of that persistent data being stored, being accessed by different people. And what we're seeing is this trend where budgets are now expanding beyond just communications, getting into things like security and data governance. So there's a whole different element of IT management that comes into play once you factor that persistent data that comes with this new collaboration model.
That's great. And just on that, Dimitri, I wanted to ask you just in terms of the big business outcomes here. Just if I was building a business case for AI ops, what would you say are the big benefits?
Yeah. So one of them I already mentioned. So you become more preemptive about how you deal with your UC service. Then a second one that is often overlooked is that AI ops can actually also give you some insights into how people are using your technology to align with your business goals. So I'll give you a few examples. Maybe interesting for a retail chain to look at how the engagement level of a specific location maps to the success of that location, right? Maybe that very successful retail locations interact more with HQ, interact more with the product teams in HQ. And you can use AI ops to surface a few trends that you may not have thought about, right? That's one thing. I would say you could call that mapping application performance metrics to business objectives. That's like a big one. And then a third advantage is obviously reduced cost and risk. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that. So we used to kind of throw a dart as to where we would invest in terms of improving the service, right? And usually that dart would land in the place where the users were most vocal. We would start investing in improving network, in increasing firewall bandwidth where the users were complaining most of the time, right? And then you typically had some locations where quality was really, really bad, but nobody really cared because nobody complained. So the AI ops stuff will surface. There's machines who are going to surface things, right? So they're not as biased as humans usually are. And what we, for example, do in our team is we bring up certain problem areas. We call them insight center cards. And we chip away at the problems one by one. And those problems are not expressed by users, but as an end result, the users become a lot more happy, right? That's one thing. So second thing is that you can also kind of assess what the impact of your changes will be if things are done the right way. And you can also get some help deciding where you will get the biggest return on investment, right?
Dimitri, I just wanted
also,
to add
yeah.
to that Insight Center card. One of the key things is Dimitri's team. They manage hundreds, if not thousands, of sites across the world for some of the largest enterprises. And at that scale, you can't have somebody sort of look through a needle in a haystack to find which sites are performing well, which sites are not. And these are where techniques like anomaly detection we bring up. And so the insight cards that Dimitri was referring to sometimes will bring up a card that says anomaly detected at a particular site. And that makes the difference to a service management team because it says, hey, look, that site may have been okay before. Maybe something has changed in that site. And now recently, maybe there was a misconfiguration. Somebody fat fingered a router setting or something like that, and so that thing pops up for his team to look at, and that's where a good example where practical application of the sort of AI ML ops techniques in that help with their managed services. Sorry, Dimitri, just want to add that in. So
no, absolutely, and actually that was my final point on this was AI ops can also help you to surface some security risks, right? People are calling specific countries excessively over the past few weeks. Go and look into this, right? So it helps you surface things that you wouldn't normally notice in the traditional world of the IT admin with the traditional tools you used to have.
Great. So, Alan, talk to me about how you take this to market. How do you productize this solution? Tell me more.
Sure. Well, I mean, from our standpoint, when we go into customers, from a consulting standpoint, we see ourselves as not just delivering a project outcome. we don't look at it from that sort of lens of just what we're delivering. From our standpoint, we want to be the customer's trusted advisor and have them be in a successful operational state. That's what we really care about, and that's what honestly the business cares about. And so as we in terms of operationalizing this, one of the key things we do in going into customers is really start with a strategic conversation. And we talk about architecture details and design options for voice and Teams or Zoom, all that sort of stuff you expect from a consulting practice. But we've invested in folks that have gained expertise, for instance, in ITIL. We bring in folks that are knowledgeable of our product, knowledgeable about how to actually run a collaboration and communication service. And we'll actually, as part of our discovery, is actually work with customers to say, hey, how do you currently run your service today? We'll actually talk about their tooling. We'll talk about their service desk model. We'll talk about how they do incident management. How do they approach SLAs, right? And generally speaking, a lot of enterprises are not evolved enough and haven't thought about some of these challenges. And as soon as we start to show examples, tell stories, particularly leveraging examples from our other enterprise customers, they start to realize that, well, if this other enterprise in my vertical went through the same problem, maybe I should take some of this advice so I don't repeat that same problem. And I think that's where a lot of our large enterprise credibility really comes into play in some of these engagements.
Well, that makes.
I would add one more thing to add. Alan touched upon this before in talking about budgets, and especially whether budget, when you think about automation and how it can help with cost reduction, and also there's a little bit of a change in budget over to more security. But just coming back to both those aspects, some of the things that we put into PowerSuite today for customers are provisioning. So this is where the normal provisioning would follow a very basic sort of a rules-based system. What we're doing is we're enhancing it with AI ML to have a smarter provisioning system, whether it's provisioning users for the types of the types of different UC capabilities, or deprovisioning users because they're not using licenses, which will go back to sort of license cost management, if you will. So these are provisioning is one aspect of many where AI ML comes in, sort of truly helps with the enterprise in the enterprise situation.
Great stuff. And finally, Dimitri, how do people get in touch? What's the best way to find out more?
Yeah, I think the best way is that we've actually created a special offer for all the UC Today readers and listeners.
I thought you were going to give them your cell phone number, Dimitri. That is not.
That's an option. So you can direct message me if you want my cell phone number. But the best way is to get on our website. It's www.unifysquare.com, and then there's a products and services section, and then under UC Managed Services you'll find that special offer. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the readers and listeners of UC Today.
Yeah, it's been absolutely great speaking to you all today. Thanks for sharing some great insights with us. And, it sounds like a fabulous solution that you provide there. So thanks to everyone for watching. And if you've enjoyed today's session, do give us a quick like or a share on social media. It's always appreciated. But for now, thanks for watching.